Sweet Medicine, the prophet of the Cheyenne people, and Bear Butte, the location where he received the ways of the Cheyenne people and the teachings he brought back to them, which include the Sacred Arrows Covenant, the Cheyenne Council of 44, and the tribal societies, who were interviewed for their knowledge and expertise about the history and the culture of the Cheyenne people. Dr. Henrietta Mann, also known as the woman who comes to offer prayer, is an enrolled member of the Southern Cheyenne tribe. Dr. Mann holds a PhD in Native American Studies. Fred White Wolf Sr., also known as Waterbird, is an enrolled member of the Northern Cheyenne tribe. Mr. White Wolf is a Northern Cheyenne elder. Alva Stenson Timber, also known as Day Walking Woman, is an enrolled member of the Northern Cheyenne tribe. She is a Crazy Dog Society sister. Silas Big Left Hand, also known as Red Wolf, is an enrolled member of the Northern Cheyenne tribe. Mr. Big Left Hand is a Sundance priest. The origin of the Tsitsistas, people of Sweet Medicine. The origin of the Cheyenne people is complex. The complexity is the result of the coming together of two groups of people who spoke a similar language. The two groups include the Tsitsistas and the Sutdaya, who, as oral history has it, were camped on the opposite banks of what we now know as the Missouri River. With the river separating the two camps, the people cautioned their young men not to bother the other camp. However, a group of young men crossed the river and got into a fight with the young man on the other side of the camp. As the fight began, and as people rushed to stop the fight by yelling, they suddenly realized they understood each other. Discovering that both groups spoke a similar language brought them together to live as one tribe. Over the course of history, the Cheyenne people, consisting of both the earlier groups of Tsitsistas and the Sutdaya, have come to exist in two different states. The Northern Cheyenne people live on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation, located in Montana, and the Southern Cheyenne people live on the Southern Cheyenne Territory, located in Oklahoma. Despite living in separate locations, these two tribes remain as one people through their shared history. But more importantly, these two tribes are held together through their culture, language, and spirituality.
Little Wolf gathered his men and instructed them not to shoot unless they were fired upon. An Arapaho scout was dispatched to deliver a message to them. It said, "If you surrender now, you'll receive your rations." After all they'd been through, they couldn't help but view such a promise with disdain. Little Wolf replied firmly, "We're heading back to our own country." "We don't aim to fight," he yelled as he rode closer, but the soldiers opened fire nonetheless. Veterans who served on the plains 4 decades ago are likely to recount, if prompted, that there hasn't been a journey quite like it since the Greeks marched to the sea. If there's a group that truly fought for freedom and fairness, it's the Cheyenne. And if there's a people who proved their bravery and integrity without question, it's these American heroes, led by individuals like Little Wolf. In 1890, as a young doctor, I was assigned to the Pine Ridge Agency as a government physician for the Sioux and Northern Cheyenne. While I heard first-hand accounts from him about the brave journey of his people from their southern exile to their northern homeland, I believe Americans should learn about it from Dr. George Bird Grinnell's book, The Fighting Cheyennes. Grinnell's account is clear and unbiased, offering a straightforward perspective on the events. During the time I spent with him, Little Wolf appeared as a striking figure, possessing the inherent dignity, gentleness, a melodious voice, and an amiable demeanor characteristic of many courageous leaders among his tribe. On one occasion, while he was dining with us at our residence on the reservation, I, as was my custom, inquired about his early experiences. A companion who was present offered the following anecdotes. Let me explain why he's been fortunate throughout his life. When he was just a young boy, our tribe was facing a winter of scarcity, and his wise mother had set aside a small portion of buffalo meat. She presented it to him with a solemn remark, saying, "My son, be patient, for as you grow older, you may encounter even tougher times than these." He hadn't eaten all day and was feeling pretty hungry, but just as he was about to grab the meat, a starving dog grabbed it and ran out of the teepee. His mother chased after the dog and brought it back for punishment. She tied the dog to a post and was about to whip it when the boy stepped in. "Don't hurt him, mother," he cried out. "He grabbed the meat because he was more famished than I am. I heard about another compassionate deed of his during a tough situation. When he was still young, he got caught out with a group of buffalo hunters during a blinding blizzard. They had to hunker down side by side in the snowdrifts, and it took a whole day and night before they could get out. The temperature dropped sharply, and when they got up, they were at risk of freezing. Little Wolf gave his quality buffalo robe to an old man who was shaking with cold and took the other man's thin blanket for himself. As a grown man, he became smitten with a maiden from his tribe, and following the prevailing custom, the couple eloped. Upon their return to the camp as husband and wife, there was much commotion over the matter. It turned out that a chief had lavished numerous gifts and courted the maiden with the intention of marrying her, and her parents had accepted the gifts, which were taken as consent on their part. However, the girl herself had not agreed to the marriage. The angered suitor's bitterness was intense. Rumors circulated in the village that he had openly stated that the young man who defied and insulted him would face consequences. Upon learning of the threats, Little Wolf informed his father and friends that he had simply exercised his right as a man. "Inform the chief," he declared, "to choose any weapon he likes, and I'll meet him within the circle of lodges. He must do this or retract his words. The woman isn't his. Her family accepted his gifts against her will. Her affection belongs to me." The chief offered an apology, thus averting the unavoidable duel, which would have resulted in a fight to the death. In the early days, Little Wolf exemplified the bold bravery typical of the Cheyenne, motivating the younger generation to seek their own triumphs. When the most challenging ordeal in his people's history arose, he was still relatively young, perhaps around 35. As I can attest, and as Dr. Grinnell's book confirms, he was the leader who primarily steered and protected them during their tragic journey from the Indian Territory to their northern homeland. I won't delve into the righteousness of their cause. I'd rather cite Dr. Grinnell to avoid any perception of exaggeration on my part. They had traveled, he describes, from the high and arid lands of Montana and North Dakota to the sweltering and muggy Indian Territory. They had journeyed from a region where buffalo and other game still roamed abundantly to a place where the wildlife had been wiped out. Soon after their arrival, they were besieged by fever and chills, an illness entirely unfamiliar to them. Food was scarce, and they began to face starvation. According to the agent's testimony before a Senate committee, he never received enough provisions to sustain the Indians for more than 9 months each year. These people were accustomed to a diet rich in meat, but the beef provided by government inspectors was nothing more than skin and bones. Describing their hardships, the agent stated, "They have survived, and that's about all." After enduring this for about a year, the Native Americans reached their limit. They departed from the agency where they had been relocated and headed north. Despite troops camping nearby, they made no effort to hide their intentions. Instead, they openly declared their plan to go back to their homeland. In past years, we've heard a lot about Chief Joseph leading the Nez Perce in their march, but not much is recalled about the Dull Knife Uprising and Little Wolf's journey north. The tale of this journey remains untold, but in the traditions of the old army, this campaign stood out. Veterans who served on the plains 4 decades ago are likely to recount, if prompted, that there hasn't been a journey quite like it since the Greeks marched to the sea. The escapees pushed steadily northward, undeterred, as orders flew over telegraph wires and special trains ferried troops and horses to intercept them at likely points along the various railway lines they had to cross. Among the 300 Indians, there were 60 or 70 warriors, while the remainder consisted of elderly men, women, and children. An army officer once informed me that 13,000 troops were mobilizing across the land to capture or eliminate these few individuals who had fled the fever-ridden South, and in defiance of all obstacles, were advancing northward without faltering. The War Department mobilized all its forces against them, but they persisted. Whenever troops engaged them, they halted and battled until they repelled the soldiers, then resumed their northward journey. Sometimes they didn't even pause but continued fighting as they marched. They mostly sought to evade confrontations, and they succeeded, encountering only 4 major battles in which they suffered around 6 fatalities and a similar number of injuries. It's important to note that they had exhausted all efforts to seek justice before resorting to this drastic action. Little Wolf approached the agent in the middle of summer and stated, "This land isn't suitable for us, and we want to go back to our mountain home where we lived well. If you don't have the authority to grant permission, allow some of us to go to Washington and explain the situation, or you can write to Washington and request permission for us to return." "Stick around for 1 more year," the agent responded, "and then we'll consider what options we have for you." "No," Little Wolf insisted. "If we wait another year, there won't be anyone left to make the journey north. We have to leave now." Not long after, it was discovered that 3 of the Indians had vanished, and the chief was instructed to hand over 10 men as guarantees for their return. He declined. "These 3 individuals," he clarified, "could easily disappear into the wilderness where they cannot be traced. You'd never retrieve them, and my men would be stuck as prisoners indefinitely." The agent then warned that if the 10 men weren't surrendered, he'd cut off their rations and starve the whole tribe into compliance. He seemed to overlook the fact that he was dealing with Cheyenne. These folks hadn't realized they were becoming prisoners when they accepted the government's offer of friendly terms and relocated to the reservation. Little Wolf rose to his feet and shook hands with everyone before delivering his last carefully considered speech. "Hey folks, I've been a friend to the white folks for a good while now. I don't want any bloodshed here at the agency. I'm heading north to my own land. If you're planning to send your soldiers after me, I'd appreciate it if you'd give us a head start. Then, if you're still keen on fighting, I'll be ready to square off with you, and we can settle things on that ground." The Cheyenne wasn't making idle threats. He meant every word, and I reckon the agent got the message, because even though the military was around, they didn't try to stop the Indians from leaving. The following morning, they packed up the teepees swiftly. By late afternoon of the second day, the scouts spotted the troops coming. Little Wolf gathered his men and instructed them not to shoot unless they were fired upon. An Arapaho scout was dispatched to deliver a message to them. It said, "If you surrender now, you'll receive your rations and be treated well." After all they'd been through, they couldn't help but view such a promise with disdain. Little Wolf replied firmly, "We're heading back to our own country." "We don't aim to fight," he yelled as he rode closer, but the soldiers opened fire nonetheless. In response, the Cheyenne launched a charge. They managed to repel the troops for 2 days, with only 5 men injured and none killed. After the military withdrew, the Indians pressed on northward, taking their wounded with them. This scenario repeated itself multiple times. Throughout, Little Wolf maintained impeccable control over his men, and there were hardly any acts of aggression. They managed to acquire some crates of ammunition left behind by retreating troops. At one point, the young men were eager to pursue and wipe out an entire unit that seemed vulnerable, but their leader restrained them. They had now entered buffalo territory, and he always kept their primary goal in mind. He remained remarkably composed. Years later, one of his men recounted to Dr. Grinnell, "Little Wolf didn't seem like a regular person. He seemed like a bear. It's true that someone of his caliber during a crisis undergoes a spiritual transformation and moves as if in a dream." At the Running Water, the group split up, with Dull Knife heading towards the Red Cloud Agency. He surrendered near Fort Robinson and faced his unfortunate destiny. Little Wolf stayed in the Sand Hills throughout the winter, where game was plentiful and there were no white settlers. Later, he traveled to Montana and then to Pine Ridge, where he and his people lived peacefully until they were relocated to Lame Deer, Montana. He resided there until the end of his life, finding solace in the tranquil surroundings as time passed. Beyond the clouds of racial bias, there lies a clear sky. And in that ultimate court of honor, a noble spirit like Little Wolf's finds its rightful place.
You now find yourself embarking on a westward journey via automobile. How and why did you end up traveling to this mysterious retreat? What is it about you and your path that led you here on this road, on the very perimeter of manifest destiny? What do you seek? It is our charge now to transition away from Entity Prime, and I will instruct you how to do so. Before nations, before industry, and before your lifetime, we lived by another set of laws. We were guided by principles which allowed for unbound movement, limitless creativity, spontaneity, and ingenuity. We call this natural state of being entity flow. And you are currently experiencing a state of entity flux. At this very moment, you are undergoing a gradual shift in awareness. Can you feel it? In this way, your journey has begun. Gradually over the ages, another force made itself prevalent in the world. It is the force of order, boundary, and restriction. It defines what is and what is not possible. It manifests itself in a grid-like mechanism of imposing standards. This is the state we call Entity Prime. Indeed, the secret roads have been closed. There are those who believe the age of Prime results from the hidden work of a shadow organization called the Clerisy. This group of powerful autocrats seeks to dominate world populations through covert governmental and economic activities. The Clerisy have attempted and failed to infiltrate and disrupt our order throughout the centuries.
This here is the Cheyenne Chief Little Wolf from the First Nations who want to speak to you and say some things. Little Wolf lived from 1820 till 1904 and lived in the Black Hills of South Dakota and the Lame Deer Reserve in Montana, and was the spiritual incarnation of sweet medicine, the spiritual ancestor of the Cheyenne. Well, let's hear what Chief Little Wolf wants to say to us now in the year 2013.
My name is Little Wolf and I come from the Cheyenne Indians. I'm talking to you today through the mouth of a lady who I once spent a lifetime with back in the 1800s. I speak to her on a regular basis and I also speak through her on a regular basis. We are old enemies and we are old friends. As all people have once upon a time perhaps been enemies, and perhaps once upon a time they've been the dearest of friends. The reason I want to speak about this today is to speak about friendship, to speak about what friendship really means and what people mean to each other. Because what we seem to find across the nations of America is that there's been so much hatred, so much bloodshed, and so many problems which have been caused by those who don't have anything actually to do with us, that have actually broken the will of the American red man. There are probably also a few of you listening now who are really wondering if this woman is actually bringing through my voice, but I can assure you that I am. And if any of you are clever enough to be able to channel yourselves, then you will understand that this lady is actually bringing me through. I was with the Cheyenne natives in the 1800s. I was one of their chiefs. We were attached to the Lakotas. We lived along the Cheyenne River, but we spent most of our lives in hiding in those years. We had a lot to do with a lot of other of the Native American Indians, particularly the Apaches. The Apache warriors from the south were quite a dangerous bunch, and a few of them turned on us a few times, which seems to happen all over the world at the moment. We see brothers turning on brothers, and we see sisters turning on sisters. And we of the nations have become tired of this, and we of the nations would like to call for peace. But before we call for peace, I think we need to call for the wolf tribe to come back. As a wolf myself, I think you understand the concept of the wolf tribe if you have anything to do with the American natives. The wolves themselves actually come out of a very generous and beautiful surroundings. They are a pack of animals who actually have honor. They are a breed of creatures who actually live in simplicity, and they are of the gentlest of natures unless you touch their families. This is exactly what we are like. There are many of us in America who are waiting for the call for the wolves. And when the wolf call comes, I can assure you that there are many American natives who are waiting to take up arms again. I only hope this time that it will be a peaceful movement, that we won't have any more of our crosses to bear, if you understand the pun of what I mean by bearing or maybe even wearing a cross. I don't think any of us want to wear crosses anymore. I don't think we ever did. I don't think we ever wanted any of the bishops to rule in our particular cities. I don't think we had to watch our women slain and murdered, our children raped and brutalized. Neither did we have to watch the cornfields that were red with poppy seeds, or your corn from the south. I tell you, there's a lot of corn and cotton. Cotton fields in the south were usually red poppy fields. The poppy fields had an awful lot to do with the problems in America. I think you all know that poppy is part of the base element when we come into making some drugs. We can bring in opium. We can actually do some good with it if we need it when people have been harmed or endangered. But when we sell these drugs around the world, going through Havana, straight into Amsterdam's ports, which is what they were doing in the 1700s, then we understand where most of the drug trading came out of in those years. The lady speaking knows nothing of this. She is only moving my words. But I can assure anyone that's listening here today that Havana was a very large drugs capital, as was Amsterdam, as Amsterdam still is, as most of you know. And most of this went out of the southern ports of Louisiana. The southern gentlemen enjoyed very much their drug trafficking. It made them all very rich. I think you've seen the beautiful estates they used to live on and the slave trades that they had. Most of the slaves were bought with money from drug trafficking, and most of the drug traffickers actually came out of the south. But that's not to say that a Mr. Washington didn't also have one of those rather large, beautiful houses with a few slaves. I even believe he had some red fields, but I don't think many people who understand who Mr. Washington was would be very happy if the Indians actually turned around and said that he was actually a drug-crazed alcoholic who liked screwing his Indian girlfriends as much as his black slaves. But then again, I don't suppose many of the white gentlemen in those days actually admitted their preferences. Their preferences went further than that. And although we don't need to go into this today, I can assure you that our nations were subjected to shocking harm. The black man was also subjected to enormous degradation. And one degradation that the Indian is very sad and sorry about is that a black man now sits on the throne of the United States. I believe it would have been wiser of the fools that hide behind the Bush organization if they had actually given America back to the red man. I believe we have more rights to govern our own lands than a black man who was actually not born in America but in Africa. He has an African father and a white mother. And I actually believe if you go into his genealogy, his white mother comes out of the Bush family, which is a very interesting line of genealogy that actually goes through Germany. I believe it even touches Switzerland here and there. I think they have a few Saxons behind them and a few Hanoverians and quite a few Swiss families. I believe they're connected also to the English crown, the Dutch crown, the Swedish crown, and a few other rather heightened names around the world. I think what they don't know, though, around the world is that this family has been using the Americas as a possibility of moving a lot of very dangerous instruments around the planet. From instruments, I mean, this could be a combine harvester. It could be a wheelie bin that you push outside for your rubbish, or it could be something a little bit more dangerous that we use when we go into battle. And certainly when we battle on the streets and try to hurt your children so badly that they can no longer function anymore. When they put their dangerous arms on the streets, I don't have to say to you what I think they're using. I'm not going to endanger this woman with this. I won't blame anyone in their present living family. We're just going to talk about the 16th, 17th and 1800s, when the same families were actually governing the southern states of America, along with a few of their northern allies, and when they were already putting a lot of drugs even onto the streets of countries such as Ethiopia, surprisingly enough. South Africa was also transporting huge amounts of drugs, I believe, through those wagons that were brought in from the north. I think some of the Boers came down from Amsterdam. I have a feeling they were pulling in quite a few of their drugs to take them down to harm some of the very nice Zulu people in the south. But then, you know, the Zulus are my brothers too, and what an extraordinary breed of mankind they are. They are open, honest, generous, and highly enlightened. I think that is a little bit more of our likeness than those that wear crosses and really don't know what to do with their neighbours, apart from try to harm them if they don't agree with them. We're coming to a close because I know the minutes are running away. I don't know exactly how much longer I have to speak, but I think if the gentleman taping would like to know more, I will speak again. I thank you all for listening, and I offer you my humble apologies for anything that I or any of my brethren ever did to any one of you in the past. I offer love and peace. Thank you.
Благосостояние Запада в значительной степени было достигнуто благодаря ограблению колоний на протяжении веков. Но это же факт. Фактически такой уровень в значительной степени развития был достигнут в значительной степени за счет ограбления всей планеты. История Запада, по сути, хроника бесконечной экспансии. Пора все-таки избавиться от этого мышления эпохи колониального владычества. Хочется, так сказать, протрите глаза. Эта эпоха давно закончилась.
Sweet medicine, prophet of the Cheyenne people.
muasne na na pomhoja na gente ik na somt kumuksan mu wis jam ho ma
betet niwa dot no ja mocht ostande nemot jo
Nan ich hände das systematiskt hände det här han är statsnet måste så stanna må här här works där inte var måste ha vet ni hen hade var han har på nattes hat samma det måste ta har på nattes hat måste hände det var så jag henne att det kan inte säga henne an måste säga na måste ta det na hen måste det kan nu nimmatama na bonto nästa sen att måste måste det säger till jag här när na måste jag måste ställa na jag måste det tamma man nes det en hoppas det högsta att den säker var det måste man det var det henne måste ta det här säker var den är starkast det var näst
då det måste namaste ne hetta mustaho na ho ma tamata ta'ala hasta ma khus hasta se ma mustasun mutashahtu sila ya man ne vamos a tener su na mo que tabo ma tambe hasta me internet no tre na mo ta stasam man hemo kristna vi här när det mot sånt när det matana skickar när det så här tam så nog som hon matna hon.
Because of what he had done, sweet medicine was banished from the Cheyenne tribe for 4 years. During those 4 years, he received the ways of his people at Bear Butte, located in present-day South Dakota.
Se että ei olisi nämä asiat sen musta että se että ei olisi nämä asiat sen musta että se ei että se tu sai was tähän jo nu was ich stanu että what me hewa nama tuo se mitä hewa mahien se na saattaa että henne enää hewa tunnia koa kin he on musta haastne en he was kin he on musta se vehtsen hoa he var här du stormus när man tar här när se musta se vehtsen hoa nas musta se me har se vehtsen hoa nästan ner så när man har varit sen när det där så vehtsen måste med då var start mycket större när jag må jag måste det man måste jag det testa så det vill säga shivatam så när man tycker shivatam så det nu var det hästa när det inte jag må det man har henne var det så man har vad det nu Muka paakka hunnetsen ennen maahasne vuostaa. Mä vuosi he otam to this issue was done news. Take it door yours issue take se mehnitys. Mä vuosi että mä metsä se tos nyt aamukin ihan nyt. Nahis muka se vuosi he nyt aahdua epäjost. Nahis histon. Så det så visst jag tar med det som att det så visst är vuostan så att jag vuostan när det så då ma så hittar jag så hittar vuostan sen. Så det så visst ma här inte när man det så visst ma här no är det så. Det så visst am no vuostan så. Så det just det histos. När det står har jag sen. Måste ha jag sen så. När jag måste en här ehkä nuon me aina se on nyt hoitsi så sitten että mut se on tänne namut namut on hoitamme tänne na hemo ei ole så nu me aina hoitsi nyt no
niin saktaa ho sitten ja puolta hyvä asia. Muhokka mamma että se on nyt moet to. Nyt se stanna mutta se samme muistan. Oikeet to. On haist maksta. Mun nyt snakkemaan. Se tuonas mutta no se nyt tänne naamukta ata vuotta mukaan nyt se tänne
moi jo he se kitu se nyt tava he was se tänne stuoma moi he det så hoven vuostan taakse sen maailman se så hoven det se jo när man det så det så vuokko me jätet det så nyt havennus när man det så havesin no mohe det så jag just det så på vad han är när det då måste det komma det är så nå nyt han må en så jag är så har mot tas när man tar ja det så på vad han är måste det också alltså jag om vi står som när man tar så var när att stanna niin mä aion niitä tuo voi saa vaan noita se voi se sitten hittan no mä tietysti taamat hakko taamista nuoso tietysti sekin vuotanut sekin hawa ei oo maassa mä tekin joo maasta smak ja taamme hasta se taamakhet se aamista nuosen mohti tokstannet näin haamata ei oo stanne hyvissä en haamata se on så kaskonne han det då och kommer över sig med moche han har kan så det som har en nytt hamn man ser som att det ser en nytt moche har så att och något stanna när man tar så att då men så med annat talo moche det var inte mer än ett annat då så se on nyt tänne voimakka ja na he on myös se on tauomakka se vees namataan se maa voimasta ja se tuo ne hän nyt se vaan haetaan se makka en hän nyt se taas se
teachings sweet medicine brought back to the Cheyenne people after being banished for 4 years. These include the Sacred Arrows Covenant, the Cheyenne Council of 44, and the tribal societies.
There's the modern day version, looking like a tank, built like a tank. Look at that thing. This is the state capitol building in Oklahoma City. Constructed between 1914 and 1917, just under a 3-year time period to build this, at a time when Oklahoma City had less than 100,000 people living there. It was commissioned by Oklahoma's second governor, a Lee Cruz, looking more like a Civil War figure. All you have to do is switch out the blazer there, maybe put a hat on him and a gun on his side. It looked like a Civil War photo to me. And architect by the name of Solomon Andrew Layton, who is apparently responsible for over 100 buildings in Oklahoma City. Very curious tale, that one. We'll see more of him later in the video. Interesting story here. We're told the dome was only added in the early 2000s. It took them apparently a year, from 2001 to 2002, to construct the dome on this building. Now, I tried to dig a little bit into some of the evidence, and maybe hopefully they had some video footage or something like that on the dome construction, but I couldn't find anything. I found a few photographs. There's also a confusing story of how this was supposedly designed to have a dome, but originally it wasn't in the plans, but it was built to support a dome, so the structure was already there. We're told there was damage to the panels 10 years after construction, about 10 years after, in 2014. And then they had to come in and fix the cracks on the panels of the dome. So it's a confusing story. It seems a bit strange. Just like a lot of Oklahoma City, very young, not much older than 100 years, but as you'll see in this video, a lot more to Oklahoma than you might expect. Again with the domes. Okay, here's the first courthouse. Now, does this make any sense to you? Why on earth would you ever, first of all, tear this down 44 years after its construction? I think part of it may be because it has that Romanesque, Richardsonian Romanesque style to it, which doesn't really fit the timeline of 1906. So I think it had to go, is my guess. And again, you have that same formation up here. Magnificent structure stood for 44 years, we are told. Do you believe that? Or was it around a lot longer? And did they have to get rid of the evidence? Here's a 50-year-old theater. 1973, they tore this puppy down. As you do. I mean, these are easy to put together. You may as well tear one down. Of course, they never rebuilt them. Nowhere near the way they used to look. It's another red flag for those of you out there doing your research. Or you're not quite sure about the narrative. Why? Why are we not able to duplicate how spectacular some of these buildings are? This is again a very early time period, and if you take a look, this really doesn't make any sense. We have the streetcar and the tracks. You can see them here. It's almost like they're being hidden and covered in mud. But the streetcar is a part of life in very early Oklahoma City. The First National Bank and Trust, massive building, massive. Take a look at some of the interior here. Here we have an early gathering, and of course massive columns, very, very ornately decorated. And some of the exterior for you. Take a look at the detailing here. Those bulls' heads, rams maybe, sheep, rams, peacocks. What's this? Some sort of bird. Pretty elaborate for Oklahoma City, I'll tell you. Pretty elaborate. Just take a look at the building materials. Ask yourself what that would take in our modern day to put that together. Here we have them doing some touch-ups. They've set the scaffold up to a certain height where they can reach the ceiling. You can see here how elaborate the ceiling work is here. No detail. You have some curved marble at the bottom of these columns. You have it in the handrail and in the floor as well. Spectacular work. Absolutely spectacular. The First National Bank.